So I want to start with Anuj, if I can. Many of you people know him. He has an MBA background, and at one point he was known as a microfinance guy, but he's worked for big international NGOs, envisioning and then delivering major economic development projects all over the world. He was at the Coady Institute for a number of years, developing financial inclusion courses and other kinds of things, and very committed to member-owned institutions, credit unions and cooperatives, et cetera. And in recent years, Anuj, you've started using this vocabulary about nonviolent economy. Can you say a little bit about how did you make that switch, that shift to now using this language that's not so common out there in the business MBA world?
No, it's not. It's not. So I think, in the course of work, the so-called professional international development, economic development work, sector work, there are various terms used. And they have evolved over time in the last 30, 35 years. Making markets work for the poor, microfinance. Actually, it started with microcredit, microfinance, and then financial inclusion, and then financial literacy, the whole kinds of things. And the economic realm, it is value chain analysis, and how do you make the basic producers get the better share of the value chain, market systems work, regenerative economy, green economy, circular economy, you name it. There are so many terms, and they all are relevant and useful for their own context. And when the non-violent economy word clicked, in my mind at least, was that it was not a model, it was not a tool, it was a way of thinking about economy. So it, in some ways, it encompasses everything else that those models or that approaches, and puts a slightly different value layer on everything we do. Because many other models often do not have a strong value proposition per se, especially human value proposition. And this very intuitively and simply puts that value without complicating it too much. And so that was very intriguing to me.
Anything that you felt you had to unlearn from your previous experience to open the space for this curiosity about nonviolent?
I guess, as it happens in any larger institutional frameworks, one gets indoctrinated by its own lingo. And then you get a bit more focused and narrower in that lingo. This term allowed to reinterpret different approaches, different practices on the ground without preconceived, designed matrix. It just opened up everything. And that was very useful. So one had to give up on those frameworks and models. There's a famous donut model that everybody talks about in markets. Those who are not familiar, we are not losing much. But I think, so the practitioners often, as a practitioner, we often use them as crutches to understand and explain, and that becomes a common language. And nonviolent economy kind of unshackled many of them. Those tools and frameworks are still useful, but only to the extent that they create a way of inquiring. When the nonviolent economy gives you a completely different canvas to look at economy. Yeah.
Jill, I know for you, your journey was a little bit different. I know you as a human rights activist, a gender activist, land rights activist, etc., with lots of experience, both here in Canada and in India. and you've worked on a number of things promoting peace and nonviolence generally. At lunchtime, you were talking about the 4 different pillars. And can you say a little bit about what evolved for you that nonviolent economy became an important part of that discussion?
So I started, well, I just want to thank, first of all, David and Anuj and Reba and Annie for hosting this beautiful meeting. And particularly want to add Debbie into that. I think all of these people have been such a gift to our lives. How did I get into how did nonviolent economy come? Well, I had worked in the development sector, and I came over with the UN for a 1-year contract in 1985, and I've stayed 40 years. So I think what India offered, if I could just begin with that, David, what India offered was an ability to do all sorts of experiments. Experiments that I didn't feel I could do in Canada. Experiments because, you know, many marginalized communities in India, and everybody's looking for solutions to get them out of poverty. And so I was involved with groups that pioneered different kinds of solutions over a long period of time. But I started with environment and climate and these issues, but I very soon found out, as Anuj was saying earlier this morning, that the resource conflicts between land, forest, water, you know, were on one side, and resource extractors, whether they were miners or industrialists or eco-tourists or, you know, real estate developers, were on the other side. And there was almost this war situation that began to develop in my early years in India, and you couldn't ignore it. I mean, it, you know, and slowly I gravitated to a social movement that was working in defense of the land and the forest and the water against these forces after the new economic process and things in the 1990s. And as a result of that, never expecting to, always thinking that I was just a rural development person, suddenly found myself in a social movement. So I had no intention, but I was there because of this issue and because I felt the need to align with real people and not just do NGO work in the urban areas. And so in that alignment with people in the rural areas, I began to learn a lot about powerlessness and what people are, how people are coping with their very, very difficult conditions, often caused by the government. You know, in spite of the government and the challenges which they threw up, people continued to survive. And it was in that resilience and desire to survive that I realized, man, I have a lot to learn, you know, about this courage, about this thrift, about these values. And I slowly began to connect it to Gandhi, not myself, but I heard women talk about why Gandhi was still important. So from them, I saw it as important, and I realized as a Western development person, Canada, grew up in Toronto in mid-North America with little, you know, real experience with poverty until then, realized, you know, Gandhi offered some kind of solution. And it was the draw to these two things, the resilience and the community empowerment that I saw among women and other people, particularly in this movement, and this ability to link it to a macro narrative which Gandhi had provided. And so as years went on, and I was in this movement doing many things, I kept thinking, because I'm a Canadian, so I can't just recite what other people tell me to recite. I have a critical consciousness, and I need to go back and to Canada to reaffirm and re-verify what I'm hearing about Gandhi. Otherwise, my Canadian friends think I'm a bit cultish, So I went to St. X for a master's program and OISE for a PhD, which really helped me to reclaim this knowledge of Gandhi, not just his biography and his greatness, but something deep about his principles. And it was out of that experience of the, many decades of work, plus the learning and reflecting on what I had been doing and whether it was really valuable, that we came back, and Rajaji and I came up with these four pillars, if you will, of nonviolence. A fourfold approach is how Rajaji talks about it, where we not only need to bring in nonviolence into our social movements, as we had been in Ekta Parishad through many actions, which we can talk about later, many actions to mobilize people and get people to stand up. But we realized that once people were in these movements and got land, then we needed to help them get lively, or processes had to be animated. There's no sense of charity here, but processes need to be animated so that they can keep the land and get livelihood. And so then this idea of nonviolent social action morphed into nonviolent economy. But we also realized if we're going to have a nonviolent economy, I learned this from Reva and many others, that we need to have an education which gears people for this nonviolent economy. And if we're going to have that, then we also need to have a governance system. Because how can you do all of this nonviolent economy when the government is violent? So this fourfold approach emerged, and now we're really moving on it in these four directions. The many years we had at experimenting and piloting things, we realized that nonviolence gives us a strategic lens to move forward and address problems without provoking the forces against us stop us in our tracks. And I think that nonviolence has been working for us to redefine social movements in a different way, redefine economy. So that's how we came.
Right. Thank you for that. All those pieces, I think, are beginning to come together, and nonviolent economy is not some little thing on the side that we do, but it's a piece of a much bigger whole, which is about changing society as a whole to support the marginalized and support everyone in their livelihoods and their lifeways. Thank you for that. It's sometimes difficult, though, to think about what do we do to contribute to a movement, if it's the nonviolent economy movement. And Anuj, you've certainly had lots of experience in Canada and in India and many other places of contributing to movements, but contributing through the aspirations and the energy of people to start different kinds of enterprises, to use their own initiative to get busy doing something productive that then can contribute to the bigger whole. Can you share some examples of the kinds of things that you think you've seen people doing on a local level that connects to the bigger level?
I think the history of local economic development is very old, everywhere. And what bothered me as a student of economy is that takes you so far and no further. So microfinance makes people's lives easier. You have access to savings, you have access to credit, you can run a small shop, buy a small house, but it doesn't fundamentally address the issue of equity. And so unless you work at the institutional and the policy level at the same time, you're essentially maintaining the status quo. And that question has always remained in the forefront of my thinking personally and many other colleagues. So the kind of program designs that I got involved with had the aspiration to or dare to challenge all levels of change. So when we were working in microfinance in India, it was not just that we'll create these self-help groups of women. By the way, 120 million women participate in self-help movement in India that we started in 91 when I was just a green shoot. But I also challenge my fellow practitioners and policymakers and central bankers in India to say, big deal. The economy has grown so much and the status of these women in the rural areas has not much changed much. So I think, yes, we need to celebrate that, but we also need to critically think that this is fundamentally wrong, something wrong in that. So give you a positive example. We were looking at 1 million Tamilian workers in Sri Lanka in tea sector. These are migrants from India, very marginalized. And what in the design process we realized that the owners are not basically see them as labor. They don't see them as people per se, and say that these are lazy, they're not productive. You know, the housing costs so much because they had to take care of their housing, education. They saw them as a budget line, expense budget line, all these people. And we dared to flip the idea and say, what if you create a local collective of community members who take care of their own housing, their own roads, their own schools, and give them dignity because managers won't talk to them otherwise. And the hypothesis is that in that process, you will raise your productivity of the state. Experiment with us for 3 years and see where we go. And they said, okay, and we brought half the money and they gave half the money. But interestingly, we also realized that that model is unlikely to succeed unless the buyers, tea buyers in Europe, an association of 17 buyers, recognizes that effort and buys that tea on a preferential basis. No amount of policy making in Sri Lanka will help unless that equation of the market is addressed. So we went to that association and got them engaged. Long story short, it has always been journey. Often we find most people agree what needs to be done. The part that gets problematic or critical is how. How do we change the system? And when we try to change everything, we change nothing. That's my experience. So how do you strategically start shifting 2-3 things that start shifting the system? Like Gandhi's march to collect salt, that changed the whole system. He didn't have to do many other things. So that has been kind of my learning journey in the design of the process. And now that is kind of, just to say, Nova Scotia has amazing examples of social enterprises that very few people know, even in Nova Scotia. And they're working in isolation. So in the last 3 years, I've got engaged in that to learn and then profile them at a larger level.
Yeah, so let's come back to that in a minute. Jill, for you, is there any particular example where something was done on a small scale that really connected to the whole system in a different way?
So I want to deal with a case, which I'll show you these pictures of an institution that was set up 50 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi Seva Ashram. And it was set up initially to round up dacoits and rebels and bring them to peace. But in the 80s, it started to produce khadi, right?
Khadi is the local hand-spun
This
cloth.
hand spun. This is khadi.
Kind of khadi.
And so they started producing khadi in the 80s as a way to build on the Gandhian vision, you know, because he had the spinning wheel. And in that started to build self-sustaining economy. And from that, they were able to carry out land struggles to help Adivasis get land. So they went up together. The nonviolent economy was actually freeing up resources in MGSA in order to support the land struggles of peasants to reclaim lost land or to be given land under the law of India. And I think what is interesting is I've got a picture of it today, Mahatma Gandhi Seva Ashram, where you still have the khadi today, but it's also expanded to honey and various other products. And what is really significant is that it's sustained it, and this continues. And 40 tons of honey is produced a year, so it's not a small quantity of honey. They have been shown to produce some of the best honey. Okay, and this is all done by small self-help groups in the villages. Okay, so the link there with the national is in terms of fighting for the larger land issues. So you're organizing women in villages and organizing around khadi, and in that organization you're building the economic strength of an area, which then supports a larger macro program. One would say it's a larger program, regional program, say. But something else I want to add to that, which is that recently, one of our colleagues who we trained up in Ekta Parishad in Bhopal, and she started making khadi, but creating designs of khadi that urban people could feel very, very nice in, not sort of the droopy khadi of the Gandhians. So she brought all these incredible design inputs, and from age 20 or 22, she's like 32 now, but she's like a major expert. What she did is she came to MGSA and she set up a one-stop from weaving, from hand spinning to weaving. Hand spinning is done usually in the homes. Sometimes weaving is also decentralized, but here we had a center that showed spinning, weaving, dyeing, designing, preparing. And she brought the private sector into it and called it a social enterprise. So the backdrop is this Gandhian collective based on, the old Gandhian principles of which are a little out of date, if we can say, for many people, especially business people, because they can't see scale and they can't really see beyond a few old people who are still left. But this example of this young woman, which is in this picture, is she's come in and brought the women and got things organized. And all these Gandhians who work sort of like in a black and white film at slow speed, she's come in Technicolor to bring all her. And one of the interesting things she's done is she's taken women who are in the production, so all of the Kashmiri carpets actually happen in Gwalior. We thought they were in Kashmir, but no, the Kashmiri carpets for experts are all made in Gwalior with 14-year-old girls who are knotting them at home in a community. But the export market is going down. They can't survive. So our friend Umang has got them also now doing khadi because they can make more money, but they've got all the skills for hand-based production. So what I wanted to show by this is the old meeting the new. If you can, it's like intergenerational wisdom. If you can take all the best from the old Gandhian, because a lot of the microcredit people, microfinance people have really said Gandhi, let's get out there. Because they were not able to modernize, they stayed in their ashrams. But if you can have that and provide the space in their ashrams and the raw material and all of the organizing that has been going on since 1972 to a new person who's coming in with the skills of being able to scale khadi and sell it and design it. We haven't yet seen all of the results of this scaling, but it looks pretty promising. Then we can really revive and add to a very, very important industry in India, which is hand-based cloth, which is absolutely unique to that part of the world. So I think that's a good example of some of these connections that you are wanting to make.
Yeah. Fascinating examples, and people might have some follow-up questions they want to ask. But turning to the Nova Scotia context, which is quite different, Anuj, what are a couple of the examples that stand out for you?
This is a beautiful picture, isn't it? An Indian talking about India, like a Canadian talking Nova Scotia. So many. So I'll just kind of, this happens to be, let me pick a food example. Probably the one that is known by many. This is Just Us Coffee, and they source their coffee from fair trade coffee from different parts of the world. And the founder, Jeff Moore, and his wife were on tour, saw these poor farmers in Guatemala, didn't like their condition. They said, we need to buy from you. Put his house on second mortgage, borrowed $50,000, bought a container of raw bean coffee bean, brought it here, bought a roaster, started the business. And rest is history. Today they produce $10 million worth of revenue every year. And they have about 53 staff members. They run as a worker-owned cooperative. So here is a model that is fundamentally at the core, intentionally social impact minded, and yet has created a viable business and continue to do so. And coffee market is one of the fiercest competitive market in the world. And to survive in that and thrive in that and be on top of that chain is no mean. So it's an everyday evolution. When you are running a business, you cannot have an idea that worked in 2000 and continue to do that. You have to change every day. The pricing, the sourcing, and they do that. And so I am highlighting that example, and I'll give you a couple of more. Nova Scotia, this is one of the first worker-owned business that has a social impact at the forefront, and they are thriving. They are part of Wolfville community. Many of you know this. So they don't see themselves just as business. They see them as community. So I asked this question to Jeff. You and your wife were okay? What if you couldn't sell that? That was his plan. He says, do you have a plan? No. So often these ideas are based on gut instinct. And we'll see the stories coming up again and again in a couple of examples that I will give. So I'll stop there and maybe I will pivot to other
Well, it
things.
sounds like the courage was talked about earlier, that the courage to take a risk and try something different seems to be a stepping stone towards an alternative vision. Can you give us one other example? And then I know Jill has some others from the Indian context as well.
I'll give you a completely different kind of. Usually, they would not be considered as social enterprise. So this is a company created by 3 towns in Nova Scotia: Antigonish, Berwick, and Mahone Bay. And the leaders that be 20 years back decided that they wanted to create green energy. And these 3 towns have their own distribution system. So they didn't have to take permission from Nova Scotia Power, which is a monolith corporate that really exploits every consumer. And so they created this enterprise. They created a co-owned company, co-owned 60% by Antigonish. Long story short, they have been successfully contributing to their energy consumption. So this particular project is providing about 25 to 30% of Antigonish's energy consumption, town's consumption right now, green energy. On top of that, they get about $350,000 to $400,000 every year as revenue from this project. So here's an example of you can create good, there's the problem of green energy. And run a business and do a lot of, so all that $350,000, $400,000 they gets into the community investment. So all the grants that small NGOs, non-profits get out of town is partly funded by this. Very few Antigonishers know this story.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a problem, our problem. So I think I often say this, future is already here. We just simply don't recognize it. And the micro experiences get lost in the macro narrative. And we really need to create that macro narrative in that. And so now they have expanded into solar farm. Two towns have already installed 2 megawatts of solar farm already. Antigonish is going to go live in September. It's next to a hardware store on Briley Brook. And Antigonish's aspiration is to get net zero by 2030. And chances are that they will get there sooner. So, so can we do systemic shift by coming together and creating unusual business model? Is the question that I often ask.
And a great example, because the energy sector is so crucial to so many other sectors within the economy.
But I think the other thing is that usually the governments and the councils are seen as bureaucrats and slow moving and not strategic enough and not able to pivot fast enough. And so private sector is the best, but we know what happens when the private sector takes over. So how do you create a governance system that continues this?
Right. Jill, another example from you, maybe of a particular situation where an obstacle or a roadblock was encountered and people found a way to maneuver around it and start something new, something useful?
Yeah, I think there's a really great example, and this is outside of Ectoparachute. So I wanted to give at least one within and one without. And this is called Bijou, which I think Reva has mentioned earlier today. So here was the obstacle. There was a woman who had studied law, and she really wasn't interested in law. Her name is Aparna, and she's from South India, but she was now in North India, in Delhi. and her husband was, making lots of money. So she was in a position to kind of follow her dreams. And one day, she used to rescue dogs. So she had a house in Noida. She had some 10, 15 dogs. So people knew her as a rescue person. Yeah. And one day, someone phoned up, and this is the power of a story, because she tells this story much better than I'll ever be able to tell. But it's such an amazing story. She was called up one day and said, look, there's a racehorse stallion who has been let loose because obviously they're not winning the races. And that stallion has to be, rescued. So she somehow got convinced and went to get the stallion. And when she got it, she realized she couldn't have the stallion in her back garden. So she needed to get a piece of land. So she rented a piece of land for the stallion. And the stallion was very happy, but because she had done that, people saw her as a rescue person. So they started bringing not only their dogs, but their cows. So she started collecting cows. And she today has 167 cows. And they're all different names. It's like it would be in Canada, Andy and David and Biff and Jane. So she has all the names for the 160 cows. And she has an intimate relationship with these cows. And they don't produce anything. This is just rescue, right? But she was smart enough to say, well, we'll need a little milk at home. So she's got a few milch cows, and she keeps the males and the female bulls separate from the cows. And she's learned everything about indigenous cattle, right? And here was a woman from a law office, urban, so now she's kind of shifting gears. But not only did she get cows, she got ducks, she got geese, she got pigs, and these are all rescued. So then she had to buy a bigger piece of land. It's like old MacDonald, right? She got a bigger piece of land to get all her animals. Then she realized she has to feed them all. So she needs to get more land leased to produce the food in order to feed them. But of course she wanted to make them vegan cows. So she produces chapatis, like thousands of chapatis a day, even more than Sarita, she does. And so she's got now the land to feed the cattle and the horses and the ducks and everybody. And then she realizes that I have an excess, so I might as well also, sell it. But no, and of course then she starts thinking of biograins and biodiversity. So then she creates a forest farm in order to support the production of all these biograins. And then she decides she should have a homestay so people can see the forest. Oh, but then of course she needs to feed them vegan food, so she needs a recipe and cooks. And then she sets up a restaurant for vegan food. And then, by the way, she has an excess, so she gets a store and starts selling the grains in Noida. Like one thing is sort of an organic, she just followed, like she gives me the picture. She knew nothing about agriculture when she was first planting. And she had her computer saying what grows with what, but fortunately she got some experts, local experts. And then she realized she had to hire 80 women from the local community, but then this isn't very self-sustaining. So she started a toy making program with the women where they made little stuffed animals shaped after the real animals. So the piggy was a piggy, a knitted piggy, as well as you could come and see the live piggy. So she did all these incredible things. And this was in a part of Uttar Pradesh, outside of Delhi, about 100 kilometers outside of Delhi, between the Yamuna and the Ganga. And it's very fertile, groundwater is just, a few feet below. but it was a totally criminal area of Uttar Pradesh. And slowly, with all this employment and always getting people to come and learn her seed, and then of course she used to collect the cow dung from the cows and made all these cow dung pots, and then she has these cow dung logs which she sells and markets. And then because she had such a good center, she brings all these children, like we could at Firelock, to come and learn about nature, and with the homestay, so it's extraordinary. Now she has a huge center with all these people coming and going, and it started with one stallion in 2014. And it's all nonviolent economy, because it's all, you care for the cattle, and you get the cow dung, and you make the stuff, and then you have the women who are creating the knitted items, who are making money, and then she has the children coming and learning, and then it's just totally extraordinary. But what it tells me is, if you allow innovation and don't block it with all these templates of what development has to look like. If she had known if she had gone to Irma or one of these development schools, she would have been closed.
It's like that comment this morning about giving the permission to dance, and amazing things can happen when we give that permission.
And so now what we recently did is we invited her down to Matarai, our center, because 10 kilometers away we're creating a huge Gandhi Darshan with all exhibits and traditional methods of doing production, and she's our lead consultant. She's the woman for free who's giving her time to tell us how to do it elsewhere. And this is a trained lawyer. And I think what Gandhi and many of his ilk used to talk about was how we should never just try to do one thing. We should do many things. We should be multi-purpose. Yeah. And I think what India offers that, I don't know if Anuj has found the same, is when you're in India, when you go to a village, there's 6 million things you have to think about. So you have to be the water specialist and the women's specialist, and you take on multiple roles. And we're so defined in our roles in Canada, that you're either this or that, and it's like the existential thing that if you're a waiter, you think of yourself as a waiter, yeah? And the whole naming of your knowledge and naming of who you are, which is a great loss of agency. So for me, she provides not only a beautiful example of nonviolence, but a woman who is totally at peace. If you go to the Bijom, I'm going to pass this around, but if you go to the Bijom website and see her laughing, holding her cattle, like a baby, it's just totally amazing. So I think we need to get back to some kind of sense of innovation, which is not technological, which is not somehow high tech, but is somehow human tech, human, innovation, human. You just take some resources at Firelock and you start making, an
magic out of
it and a pizza stove, and then you get a wok, and then this is building organically. And I just wanted to finally say thank you, because you are not only leading the way as a place for people to come and retreat, but you're acting out this finding your way as you go, getting out of the dark room. Who would have thought, that you could have got this far? So that's what I would say.
Thank you. So I know there's many other examples, and we'll hear some more from both of you.
One of the ways in which we have tried to change the language, and this came out in our experience in southern India, use the term scale out instead of scale up, and have distributed network as opposed to centralized network, where you can have replicate as opposed to grow, and allow that replication to take its own contextual design as opposed to your design. And so I think that there are number of theories as well as practices around that, but it's a real question. It's a real question, and that's where the revenue often is a critical piece of the puzzle. If it's as a rich benefactor, great. If they are continuing to support, great. But if not, then how do you maintain independence where the government money is shrinking, state money is shrinking, and putting you in the pigeonhole? You can do this, you cannot do that. And that's the global question. Right now, 0.7% conversation in the world, which you know about, where all governments were supposed to put 0.7% in international development, gone. Nobody was talking about it. So our sector is at the crisis at this point in time. And one imperfect, small effort is pivot towards social enterprise approach, where we don't see contradiction between business and non-profits. In fact, we bring that together. And this, I'll probably say more tomorrow morning when Erica is here, what New Dawn is trying to do. But this is a critic. Of all people, she probably feels the pinch every day about that model among all of us, because she has to make critical decisions of when she buys that coffee, where is the money coming from? These are real questions. These are not conceptual, right? And that's where rubber hits the road.
But I really thank you for that question. I think that's why we talk about economy and not just about social enterprise, right? Because we're trying to figure out if we have enough social enterprises that are kind of in cooperation with each other, then each little initiative will find it easier in this very adverse mainstream market economy. So that's why within Ekta Parishad, my organization, our organization, which covers many geographical areas, is trying to get identified groups like Firelock and other groups, and then do cross-trade, share common facilities, where we're trying to also figure out how to do more direct marketing together, where we can help each other, where one person can go, if you can't talk to the government because you're just exhausted with what you're doing, someone else will go and talk to government. So that's the reason. It's almost like a little mini chamber of commerce, something that we can all back up against, which is sharing the same vision. And that's what the Nonviolent Economy Network is.
Coming up.
And that's precisely why we wanted to have it here, because this is a little enterprise and it needs to feel connected. So I think we talked a little bit about the producer side, and I think the marketing side is really important, because it was raised here a few times this morning about consumption and consumer and conscious consumerism and how that leverages the whole value chain, right? And so we did two things, which I want to draw to your attention. Two big markets that were done, one in South India, one in North India. So in two very different settings by two very different groups, but were linked under the Ekta Parishad umbrella. And so the first market is called the Ahimsa Sentai. Okay, Ahimsa is of course non-violent, Sentai is market in the Tamil language. And this was in September 2022 for about 5 days. And it came about as a result of so often things don't just come out of a business need immediately. That's what I was trying to say. It came about when 6 young people who were worried about the climate came together and said, we are so desperate. What can we do? And they talked, and we talked with them about some of the Gandhian stuff, and they came up with this idea of a center, IMSA Center. And what that was is, if you're talking about nonviolent economy, as young people, we want to touch it, smell it, feel it. We don't want to just imagine it, because we're in a very much more precarious position in terms of the climate and making money and finding ways to live in this world today. So we want to create something that's real for young people. And I thought that was really interesting. So what they did is they got 140 producers all gathered across a large geography of South India. And these are all people in one of 5 buckets, either in food, and all the food production, or clothing, or shelter, mud, housing, because we have mud in India, and other kinds of ecological housing, and traditional medicine, and ecotourism. So these were the 5 buckets. And so we called producers from these 5 areas, 140 of them, and we gave them money. I raised, with my colleagues, some money for them, so they could build a huge kind of tent. And then these producers paid for their own booths and so on. And then at the same time, we had a learning exchange. So we had constant speakers coming from all over the country, including, you won't see here, but including Jigme Tinley, who was former Prime Minister of Bhutan, from the Happiness Index, who formulated the whole Happiness Index. So he came to speak. Many really brilliant speakers. So you have kind of theorizing over here and the practice of selling here, sort of interlocking. Then we got 14 colleges, universities from Madurai, all primed to come, some of whom were volunteers. And they all came to interact with the producers and understand the problems of production, because mostly they buy on this now. I mean, they don't even talk to people. So this is like a new thing, surprisingly. And the imperfections of production and the beauties of handmade as opposed to mass-based, and all of those ideas were coming to them as they talked to them. Then they went to the learning exchange to talk about their ideas there. Then we had huge cultural events in the evening, all traditional culture, because we're talking about local economy, traditional culture, learning exchange. Now this was 5 days, 10,000 people a day came through this weekend. Wow. And the producers made a huge amount of money, but got to talk to people. So actually money was not their only, and all the young people got hooked up with many producers, started doing, Instagram for them and making them little websites, whatever. So that was going on. And this was just a real agora, in the real sense of the word, It was a place of commerce and a place of people's intercourse, interaction. And I think that was a phenomenal impact. They talked about it really for years. Plus, from Kumarapa, who was buried 50 kilometers away, we had a pediatra from Kumarapa, with all these walkers to bring the message of Gandhi's economics. So the whole thing was staged, so we made a performance of nonviolent economy. And I think people have to see performance in order to believe. The stories are good, performance is better, that you can actually engage yourself in, right? And all these producers are now hooked in, I wouldn't say all, but a few are helping each other and so on. But the second one, if I have time just for a quick second.
Really quick, yeah.
Really quick second. So we did one in North India, again with a youth group, all volunteers, this time 60 producers, in a beautiful kind of old architectural structure in the middle of Bhopal. And they had cultural programs, But they had also lectures on nonviolent economy, so suddenly the producers were starting to talk nonviolent economy. And that was really, really interesting. So that was just this year. So we had one in 22, one in this year, and I can't stress enough how important direct markets are. Because what they do is they're educational, they're cultural, they're, and many of the ones now in India that we have, not many, but a few, are all running spontaneously. People bring their goods on a Sunday morning, run them on someone's land, and it just goes. And you can really build from, you don't have to have the mega ones. You can even have the small ones. So I just wanted to say how important that is from the point of getting markets and selling your goods, doing community conscientious consumerism among youth in particular, making them understand they can make a difference with their consumer decisions, but also this idea of not just thinking that everything is in the market logic, it also needs some thought leaders. If you don't have thought leaders, it's really hard. So what you were saying earlier, it's for advocacy and for making larger scale changes. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Anuj, final word or one more example you'd
If
like
we
to?
need to, otherwise we can, depending on time. I guess just to kind of say the obvious, we are sitting in Nova Scotia with overall population of over 1 million people, compared to India of 140. So 1.4 billion people. So it's a very complex story in India. Here is Linda Best, and you know her. You like to say about, you probably know her better than I do. So feel free to start off, and then I'll kind of probably just add.
Linda is just one of those people that, like, if it is to be, it's up to me. Humans,
Yeah.
and also I
On the left.
cannot do this. Linda, in the 20-some odd years ago,
She this one.
Linda
2012.
yeah,
2012.
identified that the C. diff potential in Nova Scotia held great potential and was mega underutilized. So C. diff is a Community Economic Development Investment Fund. It enables people to direct their local resources towards community development initiatives that will generate, ideally in perpetuity, enough funds to sustain a growth of itself. I mean, technically you're supposed to be able to take money out of a C. diff, but it tends to look back into the C. diff because of the people who identify. She started FarmWorks Cooperative, and FarmWorks enables a lot of things that traditional economy, like loans from a bank or startup funds for farms. You need a tractor, you need to experiment with an alternative approach to hiring, or you name it. You can go to FarmWorks and say this is the vision, and not only do you get the funding very quickly, you get Linda as your best friend forever. And she will hold your hand, she will dig in the dirt, she will tell everyone, you sing your song, she'll write your story. FarmWorks is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then they do farm-to-table restaurants, and they the way that they reinvest those funds out of a C. diff. I have not seen many other successful C. diffs. And Mark Ullman is now trying to get a C. diff program, a backbone resource that will support others in starting C. diffs, because that's the barrier at this point, is that people don't know how to maximize. And I don't know anybody who has the Energizer Bunny energy of Linda Best to stick with something that's hard and keep it going. So she's just...
Yeah. So just quickly to add what she said, they started in 2012. They just finished 14th fund every annual they have. They're always oversubscribed. These are people like me and you who invest, not donate, invest up 500 and multiple amounts. They are always oversubscribed. They have raised $5.94 million in 14 years. This year they had a phenomenal subscription. but they had to limit under 6 million because that's where the limit is set by the province, and now they have applied for 25 million to raise it. They have supported about 194 enterprises. These are, as she was saying, farms, food processing, restaurants, different experiments, wineries.
Firelaw.
Yeah, and Firelaw, there you go. And I think if you talk, we cannot really say how she frames it, but she's a passionate local food activist, quality food activist, reducing carbon footprints of what we eat, get to know your producer, and imagine that investment. So overall, they have made, by circulating the money over, they have invested about $10.7 million in the last 10 years. Wow. And the stories, and they're all there in the website, all the profile, as she was saying. Each story is a phenomenal story. And very few Nova Scotians know about it, even today, right?
It's
Farm works.
Farm works.
So I've been trying to see if we can start something here as the chapter or as just investment, and it may happen. But again, we have limited bandwidth of what we are doing, so we just need. So hopefully, but she is phenomenal, and the stories that her name will escape me, Sheena Russell, who does that energy bar, local food energy bar, become a celebrity across Canada, was first funded by Nonviolent. So there are lots of celebrities around that. But it was, what is intriguing about her is that yes, the enterprises are successful, but the values these enterprises bring are important. So it is not to run just the enterprise for the sake of money and livelihood. It's the values that these enterprises bring. That is a criteria for the funding. So you go to the website and you will listen to that. What is the differentiator? A successful enterprise versus a successful social purpose business. And these are the subtle shifts that you have to make. We had this ethical dilemma 35 years back. Microfinance, women have savings, taking loans, and the most profitable business in the village at the time, can you guess what was? Rice beer. And huge problem in that region, alcoholism.
Of course.
And so as a program designer, you are saying, should we try and cut that? Should we try and put some rules around that? And then say, no, these are adults. How can we actually ask them not to? That's the economy. Mm-hmm. There are lots of ethical dilemmas in this space. Nothing is white and black. Everything is gray. So in that market, there might be products and producers who are promoting consumerism or using plastic or this and that. So one has to really keep those pitfalls as one navigates these spaces. So Linda does it best. Her name is Linda West. She thinks through many of these aspects and builds that into the design, and creating a system shift, not just the enterprise shift. So
That's a beautiful way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for being part of this. Lots of fodder for thought. Let's